Rain falls over Gotham the way it always does at this hour. Not heavy, not dramatic, just steady. A soft grey curtain drawn across the skyline. Somewhere above the cave, thunder rolls once, distantly, like something settling down for the night rather than announcing itself. The Batmobile eases into the cave, tires hissing faintly against wet stone, and comes to rest in its usual place beneath the stalactites. The engine ticks as it cools. Blue light from the charging dock washes gently across the cave walls, flickering, then steadying into a low and patient blow. The cave is quiet tonight, unusually quiet. No alarms, no case pending, no voice on the comm asking where he is. Just the sound of water somewhere deep in the dark, falling the way it has fallen for 100 years, patient and unbothered by the world above it. The cowl comes off first, then the gloves, set down one at a time on the edge of the workstation, leather worn soft at the knuckles. Bruce Wayne stands for a moment in the low light, simply breathing. Alfred has already gone to bed. There's a cup of tea left cooling near the bat computer, untouched, exactly where it was left 3 hours ago. A small ring of condensation forming around its base. Bruce looks at it and almost smiles. Some nights end with a villain in custody, a wound needing stitches, a city slightly safer than it was at sundown. Tonight ends with nothing. No emergency, no thread left hanging. Just time. He isn't sure what to do with it, so he does the only thing that has ever made sense to him in moments like this. He walks, slowly, past the computer bank, past the row of monitors dimming themselves into standby, past the long stretch of cave wall lined with 100 small pieces of a life most people will never know existed. The cave has always been more than a hiding place. It is a museum no one is allowed to visit. A memory kept in stone and glass and steel. Every case, every mistake, every victory quietly filed away in the dark, waiting for a night exactly like this one. A night with nothing left to do but remember. His boots echo faintly against the cave floor. Somewhere far above, rain taps softly against the manor windows, a rhythm as old as the house itself. He passes the display case nearest the stairs and stops. It's unlocked. He doesn't remember leaving it that way. For a moment, he simply looks at it, cataloguing the detail the way he catalogues everything, filing it quietly into the back of his mind rather than acting on it. Alfred, perhaps. Or simply his own exhaustion, 3 sleepless nights compounding into small errors. It's nothing. Almost certainly nothing. He continues walking, and the cave welcomes him deeper into itself, the way memory always does. One step, then another, until suddenly you are somewhere entirely different in your mind, though your feet have barely moved at all. The first case sits beneath thick glass, lit from below by a single soft light that never turns off. Inside it, a string of pearls, broken, their thread long gone, scattered now in a careful pattern that took hours to arrange exactly right, all those years ago. Bruce stops in front of it, the way he always does. Not with drama, not with grief that overwhelms him anymore. That particular wound has scarred over, the way all wounds eventually do, though scars ache sometimes in the rain. He was 8 years old. It was a Tuesday, though nobody ever remembers that detail, and the film had been The Mark of Zorro, and his mother had laughed at something on the screen, a real laugh, warm, the kind that made the theatre feel smaller and safer than it was. They left through the side exit onto Crime Alley, though nobody called it that yet. It was simply a street, a shortcut, his father's hand resting on his shoulder, his mother's pearls catching the streetlight, pale and perfect against her dark coat. A man stepped out from the shadows between 2 buildings. He only wanted the pearls. That's the part that never stops feeling impossible. even after all these years of turning it over in his mind like a stone worn smooth by water. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a war. It was fear meeting desperation on a wet street, and 2 gunshots that took 4 seconds to change every year that came after them. Bruce remembers kneeling on the pavement. He remembers the sound the perils made hitting the ground. A soft clatter, almost gentle, entirely wrong for what was happening around it. He remembers his own hands, small and useless, pressed against fabric that was already turning dark. He does not remember screaming, though witnesses said he did. A policeman named Gordon arrived first, young then, kind in a tired sort of way. He crouched beside the boy and didn't say the things adults usually say to frightened children, that everything would be all right, that it wasn't his fault, that the world still made sense. He simply stayed. He put a coat around small shoulders and stayed until someone came who could stay longer. Bruce has never forgotten that a stranger simply stayed. Later, much later, a therapist would tell him that trauma freezes a moment in time, holds it perfectly preserved, unaging, while the rest of the world moves on around it. Bruce thinks that's true. Somewhere in him, an 8-year-old boy still kneels on wet pavement in Crime Alley, forever, while pearls scatter across the stone like small pale moons. But something else happened that night too, quieter, slower, something that took years to fully understand. He made a promise. Not to punish. Not even to catch the man responsible. Though he did, decades later, quietly, without satisfaction, only closure. The promise was smaller than revenge, and larger than it at the same time. No one else should have to feel this. That was all. That was everything. Bruce looks at the broken pearls now, 30 years and 1,000 nights later, and doesn't feel the sharp grief he once did. He feels something steadier. Gratitude, strangely, not for the loss, never for the loss, but for what it left behind. 2 people who taught him that kindness was not weakness, that a city, even a wounded one, was worth loving. His father had knelt beside frightened patients for free at the clinic on Park Row. His mother had spent her Tuesdays reading to children in hospital wards who had no one else to read to them. Wayne money had built libraries and hospitals long before it built anything with his name carved above the door. Gotham deserves better, his father used to say, not as a complaint, but as a quiet, stubborn kind of faith. Bruce touches the edge of the glass case, just briefly, the way you might touch a headstone you've visited so many times it no longer feels like grief, only greeting. Still keeping the promise, he says softly, to no one, to the cave, to the pearls, to the boy he used to be. He moves on. Deeper into the cave, past the trophy wall not yet reached tonight, there's a narrow alcove Bruce rarely lingers in. A row of old photographs, faded at the edges. Airline tickets, brittle with age, pinned beneath glass like pressed flowers. A cracked leather journal with handwriting that grows steadier from the first page to the last. This is where the boy disappears, and something else begins to form. Not Batman. Not yet. Just a young man with a hole inside him shaped exactly like a promise, trying to figure out how to fill it. He left Gotham at 17, and the world he found outside it was larger and stranger than anything Wayne Manor's libraries had prepared him for. In Paris, he learned language and misdirection from a man who taught him that the best lies are built from truth. In London, criminology, the slow, careful architecture of how crimes are solved, not merely committed. He spent nights in libraries that smelled of dust and rain, reading case files most detectives never bothered with, learning that patterns exist everywhere if you're patient enough to see them. There were mistakes. Bruce doesn't hide them from himself, even now. A fight picked too early against opponents too skilled, ending with him bruised and humbled in an alley somewhere outside Hong Kong. A stranger's boot against his ribs. A lesson learned the hard way that anger without discipline is simply another way to lose. He remembers a monk in a monastery high above a valley whose name he still won't say aloud, even now, even alone. A teacher who saw the anger in him immediately, saw it the way you see a fever in someone's eyes, and did not try to remove it. Rage is not the enemy, the old man told him, watching Bruce collapse for the 9th time in a single afternoon of training. Rage without purpose is the enemy. Give it purpose, and it becomes something else. What does it become? Young Bruce had asked, breathless, furious at his own weakness. The old man had only smiled. You'll know when you find it. There were other teachers. A woman in Tibet who taught him stillness, how to slow his own heartbeat, how to disappear into shadow simply by controlling his breath. A retired detective in Chicago who taught him that criminals are creatures of habit, and that habit, studied carefully, becomes prediction. A doctor who taught him anatomy not to heal, but to understand precisely where a body could be stopped without being destroyed. 7 years of this. 7 years of building himself into something that didn't exist yet, without knowing exactly what shape it would finally take. He remembers writing in that journal, the one under glass now, its ink faded to brown. A single line, written the night before he finally returned to Gotham. I am not ready, but I am prepared. There's a difference, he thinks now, looking at the young, uncertain handwriting. Readiness never fully comes. Preparation is simply deciding to move anyway. Bruce lets his fingers rest against the cool glass over the journal for a moment, and then continues walking, deeper into the cave, deeper into memory. The next alcove holds no glass cases, just a heavy wooden desk, scarred by decades of use, layered with case files stacked with obsessive precision. A magnifying glass rests beside an old rotary phone that hasn't rung in 20 years, but has never been disconnected. This was the beginning of the mind before there was ever a mask. When Bruce returned to Gotham at 25, he didn't come back with a costume already designed. He came back with a question he couldn't stop asking. How do you fight something as large as a city's despair? Strength alone couldn't do it. He'd seen stronger men fail in worse ways. Wealth alone couldn't do it. His family's money had built hospitals that still couldn't save patients from bullets fired 2 blocks away. What Gotham needed, he came to believe, sitting at this very desk long before there was a cave built properly around it, was understanding. He studied everything. Police reports going back decades, court records, newspaper archives on crime patterns nobody else had bothered connecting. He learned Gotham's underworld not by fighting it first, but by reading it, the way a doctor reads symptoms before ever touching a patient. He remembers the first case he solved before ever putting on the mask. A string of warehouse fires along the docks, each one ruled accidental by exhausted, underfunded investigators. Bruce spent 3 sleepless weeks at this desk, cross-referencing insurance filings, shipping manifests, employee shift patterns. The pattern, when it finally emerged, was so simple it embarrassed him that no one else had seen it. Not arson for insurance, something quieter, crueler. A business owner burning down his own competitors' warehouses one at a time, always on nights when a rival's night watchman happened to be sick or absent, arranged weeks in advance through a small, unremarkable bribe. Bruce solved it with paperwork, with patience, not a single punch thrown. Anybody can be tough, he says quietly now, running a finger along the edge of an old file folder, dust rising faintly into the low light. Toughness is common. Gotham has never lacked for people willing to hurt each other. What it lacked was someone patient enough to see. This, he came to understand, would always be the foundation beneath everything else, beneath the muscle, the gadgets, the fear. Batman would first and always be a detective. The cowl came later. The mind came first. He notices, glancing across the desk, that one drawer sits open slightly further than it should. He's certain he closed it last night. He doesn't investigate yet, just notes it, the way he notes everything, quietly, carefully, and files it away for later. The same drawer in his mind where the unlocked case sits waiting. He moves on, deeper still, toward the place where the detective finally became something the city could see. A mannequin stands in careful lighting near the center of the cave, wearing the very first suit, rougher than the ones that came after, stitched by hand, the cowl slightly uneven at the ears, the cape shorter than current versions, more a soldier's cloak than the dramatic wing it eventually became. Bruce stops here longer than anywhere else so far. He remembers the exact night this began. Not the night he first wore it, but the night he decided what it would need to be. He'd been sitting in this study, defeated, 3 months back in Gotham, with nothing to show for it but case files and bruised knuckles from 3 failed attempts at intervening directly. Criminals had laughed at him, actually laughed. A masked man in dark clothes lecturing them about consequences, easily overpowered, easily dismissed. "I need them to be afraid," he remembers saying aloud to an empty study, no one listening but the rain against the windows. "Not of me, of what I represent." And then the bat, flying suddenly through the broken window above the old well that would one day become the cave's main entrance, startled by the storm outside, circling once through the study before finding its way back into the dark. Bruce remembers going very still, remembers something settling into place inside him with a kind of clarity he'd never felt before, not once in 7 years of training across the world. Criminals are a superstitious, cowardly lot. His father's voice, resurfacing from some childhood memory of a story told at bedtime. Fear, Bruce realized, was already the criminal's own weapon, used against Gotham for years, against families like his own. Why not simply turn it back? Not fear that harms, fear that stops. A shape in the dark large enough, strange enough, that violence hesitates before it acts. He designed the suit slowly after that. Kevlar plating disguised beneath cloth that moved like something living. The cape, weighted and reinforced, capable of becoming a glider when needed and a shadow when it wasn't. The cowl, built to hide his face completely, not from vanity, but because Bruce Wayne needed to remain safe for the people who loved him, and because a symbol works better than a name. The suit was never the point, Bruce says now, quietly, to the mannequin standing silent in the low light. The point was what it made people believe was possible. He remembers the first night he wore it, not triumphant, not cinematic, simply terrifying in its uncertainty. 3 muggers outside an old warehouse, expecting an easy night's work. What they found instead made all 3 surrender before he'd thrown a single punch. He remembers walking home afterward, not driving, walking, cape gathered under one arm, cowl in a bag, simply a young man moving quietly through Gotham's early morning fog, thinking, for the first time in 7 years, that the hole inside him might finally have found something shaped to fit it. Not filled, never fully filled, but finally purposeful. Bruce steps back from the mannequin, and the cave seems to breathe around him. The distant waterfall, the soft hum of machinery, rain still falling somewhere far above. He walks on, and Gotham waits for him, the way it always has, just a little further into the dark. The path curves here, opening into a wider chamber where a massive relief map of Gotham spans the entire wall, carved stone and etched metal, lit from beneath by a faint amber glow, every district marked, every bridge, every alley that matters traced in careful detail. Bruce doesn't need the map. He carries the whole city inside him, has for decades. But he stops anyway, the way you might stop at a photograph of someone you love, simply to look. Crime Alley sits near the map's centre, smaller than its reputation, an unremarkable street that happens to hold an unbearable weight. He funds a clinic there now, quietly, through 6 layers of shell foundations that keep the Wayne name from ever appearing on the paperwork. His parents would have wanted it that way, not thanked, simply helped. North of it, Wayne Tower rises taller than anything else. On the map, glass and steel against the skyline, a beacon by day that Bruce Wayne walks through has a different kind of mask entirely. The billionaire philanthropist, the charming distraction, the performance that lets Batman exist unnoticed, in plain sight. Bruce Wayne is the mask, he murmurs, tracing a finger along the tower's outline. Batman is what's underneath. It surprised him once, realizing that. For years he believed the opposite, that Batman was the disguise and Bruce Wayne the truth beneath it. But somewhere in the accumulated weight of decades, the roles reversed themselves quietly, the way roles sometimes do. Further along the map, past the financial district, the buildings grow older, more crowded. The Narrows, connected to the mainland by a single bridge easily sealed if the city ever needed to be contained. Bruce has walked every street there personally, more than once, learning names, faces, small kindnesses that cost nothing but mattered enormously. A grocer who leaves food out after closing for anyone hungry enough to need it. A retired teacher running informal classes from her apartment for children the school system forgot. Gotham is not only crime, he reminds himself, standing before the map. It's also this. Quiet, unglamorous decency that persists despite everything working against it. His eyes drift to Arkham, isolated on its small island, connected by causeway, surrounded by fog even on the map's static rendering. He doesn't linger there long tonight. Arkham holds its own weight, its own chapter waiting further ahead in the cave. Blackgate Penitentiary sits at the harbour's edge, grim and functional, holding the criminals whose madness fits within ordinary definitions rather than Arkham's more complicated ones. And above it all, mounted now in its resting cradle near the cave's upper ledge, the bat signal. Dark tonight, silent, waiting. Bruce remembers the first time Gordon used it, uncertain even then whether it would work, whether Batman would actually come, whether this strange arrangement between a police commissioner and a masked vigilante could possibly hold together longer than a single case. It held. It's held for decades. Some cities have monuments, Bruce says quietly, looking at the map, at the whole sprawling, wounded beauty of the place he's given his entire life to. Gotham has scars. I suppose I became one of them. Not a bitter thought, just an honest one. He notices, moving past the map toward the trophy room ahead, a faint mark in the dust along the floor. A footprint, partial, the tread unfamiliar. not his own boots, not Alfred's careful house shoes. He crouches, studies it in silence for a long moment. Small, recent, gone before it reaches the trophy room itself, as if whoever left it simply paused here, looked at the map perhaps, the way he just did, and then moved on. He files this away too, alongside the unlocked case, alongside the disturbed drawer. 3 small details, not yet a pattern, but close. He continues forward into the room that holds his enemies. The trophy room stretches long and dim, illuminated by careful spotlights over each individual case. Evidence collected across decades of confrontation, arranged not as boast, but as record. A museum of everyone who tried to break Gotham, and what they taught him instead. The first case holds a single playing card. The Joker, printed in faded ink, the corners soft with age. Bruce looks at it the way you might look at an old wound that never fully closes, only quiets. There is no clean story here, no origin that satisfies. The Joker himself has told a dozen different versions across the years. A failed comedian, a chemical plant worker, a grieving husband, a man who fell into a vat of chemicals and rose from it laughing at everything, forever. Perhaps that's the point, Bruce says quietly. He doesn't want a story. He wants chaos to have no explanation, because explanations imply meaning, and meaning is the one thing he's built his entire existence to destroy. Bruce has caught him more times than he can count, has stopped him from ending millions of lives on more than one occasion. And still, somewhere in Arkham tonight, cell lights dimmed, the Joker sleeps. Or doesn't sleep, more likely, waiting for tomorrow, the way a storm waits to break. I've asked myself many times why I never ended, Bruce says, so quietly it's barely more than breath. The honest answer is, I'm afraid of what crossing that line would make me. Afraid the city would lose the thing that separates me from him. He moves to the next case. A green question mark trophy, small, almost delicate. The kind Edward Nygma used to leave behind at crime scenes, like a signature demanding to be noticed. Bruce almost smiles at this one. The saddest ones, he says, are the ones who only want to be seen. The Riddler's crimes were never truly about theft or violence. They were about proving, again and again, to a world that ignored him as a child, that he was the smartest person in any room he entered. Bruce beat him, not through strength, but by solving his riddles faster than Edward believed possible. And each defeat wounded him more deeply than any punch could have. Next, a coin, half burned, half pristine. Two-Face's signature, flipped before every decision that mattered. This one aches differently. Bruce knew Harvey Dent before the acid, before the coin, before the split. Knew him as a friend, an ally, a man who believed as fiercely in Gotham's potential as Bruce did, perhaps more fiercely, because Harvey believed it could be saved through the law itself, without masks, without shadows. I couldn't save him, Bruce says, and there's real grief in it, decades old, but never fully healed. I've saved this city 1,000 times over, and I couldn't save the one man who might have saved it better than I ever could. The coin catches the light as he sets it back gently. Further along, a burlap mask, stitched crudely, the eye holes uneven. Scarecrow. Jonathan Crane's toxin has shown Bruce his own worst fears more times than he'd like to admit. Alfred dying, Gotham burning, the cave itself flooding with black water while he stood powerless to stop any of it. Fear taught me something important, Bruce reflects. It's not the enemy, it's information. Crane weaponized it because he never learned that fear examined honestly, tells you exactly what you need to protect. The final case in this row holds something colder, literally, a small snow globe, frost still faintly clinging to its glass despite years in storage. Mr. Freeze. Of everyone in this room, Bruce feels the least anger toward Victor Freeze. A man who broke laws to save the person he loved, frozen between science and grief for decades, still searching for a cure that always seems to slip just beyond reach. Love makes monsters of all of us, given the wrong circumstances, Bruce says softly. I understand him better than I've ever told anyone. He steps back from the row of cases, looking at all of them together. Joker, Riddler, Two-Face, Scarecrow, Freeze, and further down the row, cases for Bane, for Poison Ivy, for Clayface, each with their own quiet reflection waiting, though Bruce doesn't linger over all of them tonight. They taught me more than any teacher I trained with overseas, he admits. Every rogue in this room showed me a different way the world breaks people. Understanding that has always mattered more to me than defeating them. As he turns to leave the trophy room, his eye catches something small resting on the floor near the doorway. A batarang, old, one of his earliest designs, the metal duller than current models. It shouldn't be here. He remembers this particular batarang sitting in a display case near the entrance, catalogued, untouched for years. Someone has moved it. Recently. Bruce crouches, picks it up carefully, turns it over in his hands. No dust on its surface, unlike everything around it. Alfred, he says quietly to the empty room, though he already suspects this wasn't Alfred's doing. Alfred is meticulous about returning things exactly where they belong. This feels different, purposeful, but not careless. He pockets the batarang and continues walking, the mystery gathering weight now, though still gentle, still unhurried. A puzzle solving itself slowly in the back of his mind, while the rest of him continues through memory. The next chamber feels different from everything before it, warmer somehow, despite the same cold stone walls. A row of smaller display cases here, each holding something far more personal than trophies from enemies. A child's domino mask, a staff retired from use, a yellow cape carefully folded, a small clay figurine shaped like a bird in flight. Bruce's expression softens the moment he enters this room. This is the family wing, though he's never called it that aloud to anyone. Alfred started it, actually, years ago, quietly adding small items whenever someone left home, whenever someone changed, whenever the family grew in ways Bruce hadn't planned for, but never regretted. The first case holds Dick Grayson's original mask, small, a boy's mask, from a boy who lost his parents the same way Bruce lost his own, in a single, unbearable moment that split his life into before and after. Bruce remembers meeting him at Haley's Circus, 9 years old, sitting alone backstage while adults spoke in hushed voices around him, exactly as adults had once spoken around a different boy in a hospital waiting room decades earlier. I saw myself in him immediately, Bruce says softly. I told myself I was helping him. It took me years to admit he was helping me just as much. Robin wasn't originally meant to be permanent. A partnership born from grief, meant to give a devastated child purpose and structure, while Bruce quietly investigated the men responsible for his parents' deaths. But something happened in the months that followed that neither of them expected. Dick brought light into the cave that had never existed there before. He laughed at Bruce's seriousness, teased him gently about his broodiness, filled the enormous silent manor with sound for the first time since Bruce's own parents died. He taught me family doesn't have to be something you're born into, Bruce reflects. Sometimes it's something you choose, again and again, every single day. Dick grew up eventually, as children do, becoming Nightwing, striking out on his own, building a life in Bloodhaven that was entirely his, separate from Batman's shadow. Bruce remembers being proud and heartbroken in equal measure the night Dick told him he was leaving. "You raised me to think for myself," Dick had said. "So I am." Bruce couldn't argue with that, wouldn't have wanted to, even if he could. The next case holds a different mask, sharper, more defensive somehow, even preserved behind glass. Jason Todd's Robin costume, retired far too soon, in circumstances Bruce still cannot think about without his chest tightening. Jason died once. The Joker's crowbar, an explosion in a warehouse in Ethiopia, a phone call that arrived seconds too late to change anything. "I failed him," Bruce says, and the words come out rough, unpolished, none of his usual composure remaining. "I've told myself 100 reasons why it wasn't entirely my fault. None of them have ever made the failure feel smaller." Jason came back eventually, resurrection complicated and painful, arriving angrier than he left, convinced that Batman's restraint was itself a kind of cruelty toward the people criminals continued to hurt. Their relationship remains difficult even now, complicated in ways that resist easy resolution. "I don't know if we'll ever fully repair what broke," Bruce admits quietly. "But he's still family. That much has never changed, no matter how much anger sits between us." Bruce moves to the next case, a staff, simple, well-worn. Tim Drake's. Tim found his way to Robin differently than the others, not through tragedy first, but through observation. A boy sharp enough to deduce Batman's identity on his own, simply by studying photographs of Dick Grayson's acrobatics years earlier, and connecting patterns everyone else had missed. "He reminded me why detection mattered as much as combat," Bruce says. "He earned his place through his mind before he ever earned it through courage, though he had plenty of that too, when it counted." Tim brought steadiness to a family still healing from Jason's loss, patient, thoughtful, willing to ask Bruce difficult questions the others sometimes avoided. Next to Tim's staff sits a case holding a yellow and black cape, smaller still. Damien's. Bruce's son. That fact still occasionally surprises him, even now, though Damien has been part of his life for years. A child raised by the League of Assassins, trained since infancy in violence, arriving at the manor already sharpened into something that frightened Bruce more than any villain ever had. Not because Damien was dangerous, though he was, but because he'd been made that way, before he ever had a choice in the matter. "I remember the first time he smiled at something that wasn't cruel," Bruce says, voice gentle now, almost fragile. "Alfred had told a joke about tea, of all things. Damien tried to hide it, but I saw it. That smile told me everything I needed to know. That whoever he'd been raised to become, there was still a child underneath, capable of choosing something different." Damien died too once, and came back, the way this family sometimes does, grief and resurrection tangled together in ways that never quite feel real until they happen to someone you love. "I don't take any of them for granted anymore," Bruce says softly. "Not one day with any of them." The final case in this row holds something entirely different. Not a costume, but a small clay bird, crudely shaped, clearly made by a child's hands decades ago. Barbara Gordon made this for him when she was small. Long before Batgirl, long before Oracle, back when she was simply Commissioner Gordon's daughter, curious about the strange, dark figure her father trusted so completely. Bruce remembers her joining the family eventually not through invitation, but through sheer, stubborn insistence, building her own Batgirl identity in secret, proving herself capable again and again, until refusing her a place became impossible. He remembers the night she was shot, the Joker again, always the Joker somewhere at the center of this family's deepest wounds, paralyzing her, ending Batgirl before Bruce had ever fully processed what she meant to the family. She refused to let that be her ending, Bruce says, something like awe entering his voice. She became Oracle instead, the mind behind every one of us, watching, guiding, saving lives from a wheelchair with nothing but intelligence and refusal to quit. She taught me that being broken and being finished are never the same thing. And finally, though there's no case for him because he needs none, Alfred. Bruce simply stands in the center of the room, thinking of him. The man who raised a devastated orphan into whatever he eventually became, who stayed through every grief, every loss, every 3 a.m. return covered in blood that needed stitching. He never once asked me to stop, Bruce says quietly. Even when he was afraid for me, even when he disagreed, he simply stayed. The way Gordon stayed, that very first night. I don't think I've ever properly thanked him for that. Bruce makes a small note to himself. Tomorrow, perhaps, over breakfast. Something as simple as gratitude spoken aloud for once instead of assumed. He leaves the family wing slowly, glancing back once at all those small preserved pieces of the people who made his solitary war into something less lonely than it started. Past the family wing, the cave opens into a smaller alcove Bruce rarely spends much time in, a single shelf holding a handful of unusual items. A metal ring, faintly green even in the dim light, a small League of Justice medallion, a photograph, slightly overexposed, of 7 figures standing together against a bright sky. He picks up the ring first, careful even now out of long habit, though the kryptonite inside has been safely contained for years. I built this the week I met him, Bruce admits quietly, turning the ring over in his fingers. Before I trusted him. Before I understood what kind of man wears that symbol. Clark Kent had been furious when he found out, genuinely hurt in a way Bruce hadn't fully anticipated from someone capable of lifting mountains. "Do you think I'd hurt you?" Clark had asked, and there had been real vulnerability in the question, something Bruce rarely saw from him. "I think anyone can be turned," Bruce had answered honestly. "I think the more powerful someone is, the more important it becomes that someone else keeps a way to stop them, just in case." Clark hadn't liked the answer, but eventually he'd understood it. That's simply who Bruce is, the man who prepares for worst-case scenarios, even among the people he trusts most. Not because he expects betrayal, but because he's lived through enough loss to know that hope alone has never been sufficient protection. "He forgave me eventually," Bruce reflects. "I think that's when I first understood we might actually become friends, not just allies. He was capable of being furious with me and still choosing to trust me again. I didn't know many people like that." Their friendship grew slowly after that, an unlikely one, the last son of a dying planet and an orphaned boy from a dying childhood, each of them carrying grief shaped entirely differently, but somehow understanding each other because of it. "He sees the best in people first," Bruce says. "I see the worst in them first, out of habit, out of necessity. Between the two of us, we usually land somewhere close to the truth." He sets the ring down and picks up the small medallion instead, the original founding symbol of the Justice League, worn now, one edge slightly bent from an old battle Bruce doesn't fully remember the details of anymore. Diana had been the one who convinced him joining made sense at all. Bruce remembers resisting for weeks, uncomfortable with the idea of dependency, uncomfortable with trusting his safety to people whose only real vetting had been instinct and desperation during a crisis neither of them had chosen. "You mistake trust for weakness," Diana had told him once, in that calm, ancient way she had of making enormous truths sound simple. "Trust is not the absence of strength. It is strength, offered freely, to people who have earned it. Bruce had thought about that for a long time afterward. He still thinks about it, sometimes, standing in cave alcoves at 3 a.m, holding old medallions. Barry Allen taught him something different entirely, that joy itself could be a kind of courage. Bruce remembers watching him laugh in the middle of genuinely dangerous situations, not from recklessness, but from some deep, stubborn refusal to let fear define every moment of a dangerous life. I have never learned to do what he does, Bruce admits. Find lightness inside the danger. I don't think I'm built for it, but I'm grateful someone in this world still can. He looks at the photograph last. 7 figures, some now gone, some changed beyond recognition, standing together on some ordinary afternoon between crises, caught in a moment of simple, unremarkable friendship. I spent so many years believing I had to do everything alone, Bruce says quietly. It took people like this to teach me that needing others isn't the failure I always assumed it was. He sets the photograph back down gently, and for a moment simply stands in the quiet, listening to the waterfall somewhere deep in the cave, the soft mechanical hum of monitors behind him slowly cycling through standby. Something catches his eye near the floor, a second footprint, clearer than the first one he found near the map. Definitely recent, definitely not his own. He crouches, studies it carefully. Small, light, someone who moves carefully, deliberately, someone trained. The pattern is nearly complete now, though he still doesn't say the name aloud, not yet. He simply notes it, files it, and continues forward. Curiosity gentle rather than urgent, the way you feel approaching the last few pages of a book you already suspect you know the ending to. The next area of the cave holds no display cases at all, simply a long table covered in newspaper clippings, case files bound in red string, photographs pinned in careful clusters. Unsolved questions, some decades old, none of them ever fully answered. Bruce moves along the table slowly, memory settling over each cluster of clippings like dust. The Mad Hatter case, he murmurs, touching one folder briefly. 7 children disappeared over 11 days. Every lead ended in a locked room with no explanation. I found them eventually, hidden beneath an abandoned toy factory nobody thought to search because the building had been condemned for 30 years. Jervis Tej believed he was protecting them, believed the world outside was too cruel for innocents to survive in it. I understood the impulse, even as I stopped him. He moves to another cluster of files. The Zodiac murders that weren't actually the Zodiac at all. A copycat so precise, even I doubted myself for nearly 2 weeks. The answer, when it finally came, was almost disappointing in its simplicity. A forensic accountant, of all things, hiding embezzlement behind an elaborate false trail. Sometimes the strangest cases end the most ordinarily, Bruce reflects. I've learned not to assume complexity where simple greed will do. Further along, a case that still occasionally visits him in quiet moments like this one. A locked room murder inside Wayne Enterprises itself. A rival executive found dead in an office sealed from the inside, no visible means of entry or exit. It took me 6 days, Bruce admits. The answer was in the ventilation system, a method borrowed from an old Agatha Christie novel of all things. The culprit had read the same book I eventually remembered reading as a child. Detective work rewards a wide education, he says, almost amused. You never know which piece of knowledge will matter until suddenly it does. The final case on the table holds no resolution at all. A small folder, thinner than the others, containing a single grainy photograph of a hooded figure standing at the edge of a rooftop, unidentified even now, connected to at least 4 unsolved disappearances across a decade. This one still bothers me, Bruce admits quietly. Every detective has at least one. A thread that never quite resolves, no matter how many times you pull at it. He closes the folder gently, setting it back exactly where it belongs. Perhaps that's important too. Not every mystery is meant to close. Some simply teach you patience instead. He turns from the table, and there, finally, unmistakably, a fourth clue waits for him. An old journal, one he recognizes immediately as belonging to this very table of unsolved cases, sits open on a nearby chair. A chair that was empty when he passed through hours earlier on patrol. He crosses to it slowly. The page it's open to holds his own handwriting from years ago. Notes on the very first case he ever solved with Dick Grayson's help, back when Dick was barely more than a boy, still learning what all of this meant. Someone opened this specific journal to this specific page. Bruce feels something loosen in his chest, some tension he hadn't fully realized he was carrying. He thinks he understands now. He doesn't say the name aloud yet. Still, some part of him wants to hold the possibility a little longer before confirming it. The way you sometimes want to keep unwrapping a gift slowly rather than tearing it open all at once. He continues onward, the cave growing quieter still, deeper, toward the last places memory has left to visit tonight. The final chamber before the cave's long approach back toward the entrance is small, unremarkable, holding almost nothing at all. A single chair facing the rock wall, a small reading lamp, its light warm and low. Bruce sits down here. It's not a place he shows to anyone, not even Alfred, though Alfred surely knows it exists. This is where he comes when the rest of the cave becomes too loud with memory, when even his own history needs a quiet corner to settle into. There are things I've never said aloud, he admits to the empty chamber, voice barely above a whisper. Even here, even now. I'm afraid, sometimes. The admission comes slowly, reluctantly, the way confessions always do from someone unused to making them. Not of villains, not of dying. I made peace with that a long time ago. I'm afraid of becoming someone Gotham needs to be protected from instead of by. I've seen what unchecked power does to people. I built an entire ring out of kryptonite because I understand exactly how easily good intentions curdle into something dangerous. I'm afraid of the day my judgment fails and someone innocent pays for it. It's happened before. It will likely happen again. I don't think that fear ever fully leaves you once you've felt the weight of it. I regret more than I let anyone see, he continues, quieter now. Jason. The years I spent pushing Dick harder than a child should have been pushed. The women I loved and couldn't fully give myself to, because some part of me always believed loving fully meant becoming vulnerable in ways Batman couldn't afford. Selina, he says, and something in his voice softens entirely, warm and sad at once. I think in another life, in another version of Gotham, we might have built something lasting. I don't regret what we had. I regret sometimes that I never let it become more. I'm lonely, he admits, and this confession comes hardest of all, barely audible even in the empty chamber. Even surrounded by family, even trusted by heroes who could reshape planets if they chose to. There's a part of this that only I carry, and I don't think that part ever fully shares itself with anyone else, no matter how much love surrounds it. But I have hope, too, he continues, and his voice steadies now, finding its familiar, quiet resolve. I've watched this city nearly destroy itself 100 times, and every single time, it's found some reason to keep going. Ordinary people, small kindnesses, doctors who stay past their shifts, teachers who show up anyway. I think that's what I actually believe in, more than justice, more than fear. I believe Gotham is worth this. I believe it always will be. And I promise, he says finally, the same promise from decades earlier, worn smoother now with age, but no less certain. As long as I'm capable of standing, I'll keep it standing too. He sits in the quiet for a long moment after that, the small lamp humming faintly, rain still falling somewhere far above, the cave holding its breath around him, the way it always does when Bruce allows himself these rare, unguarded moments. Then, slowly, he rises. There's one more thing left to resolve tonight before dawn arrives. The quiet mystery threading itself through every room he's walked through. Bruce makes his way back toward the cave's main chamber, following the same path he walked hours earlier, past the family wing, past the trophy cases, past the relief map of Gotham, each memory settling now into its proper place behind him. Near the bat computer, exactly where he expects to find him after finally assembling every small clue into its complete shape, a figure sits in the shadows. Not hiding exactly, simply waiting, the way someone waits when they're unsure whether they're welcome. "You could have just said something," Bruce says quietly, not turning immediately, already certain of who it is. Dick Grayson steps into the low light, older now, the boy from the mask in the display case, long since grown into a man who carries himself with the same easy confidence he's always had, though there's something uncertain in his expression tonight. "I wasn't sure how," Dick admits. "I've been in Gotham for 2 days. I kept meaning to call. I ended up down here instead, going through old cases, remembering things. I moved a few items. I should have put everything back exactly right. I'm sorry." Bruce studies him for a long moment, and something in his chest loosens completely, the last piece of tension from the entire night finally releasing. "You didn't need to apologize for coming home," Bruce says softly. Dick's expression shifts, something vulnerable crossing it briefly. "I didn't know if this was still home. Not really. Not since I left." "It always was," Bruce answers without hesitation. "It always will be." They stand together quietly for a moment, the cave settling around them, water still falling somewhere in the dark, monitors humming their patient electronic breath. "Why tonight?" Bruce asks eventually. "Why come back now, after everything?" Dick shrugs, glancing around at the cave that raised him as much as Bruce did. "I don't know exactly. I guess I needed to remember who I was before everything got complicated. This place still does that for me. It always has." Bruce nods slowly. "It does that for me too," he admits. "More than I let myself realize most nights." They walk together toward the cave's entrance after that, unhurried, the way family moves when there's nowhere urgent left to be. Outside, the rain has finally stopped. Bruce and Dick stand near the cave's mouth, looking out over the grounds of Wayne Manor as the first pale suggestion of dawn begins touching the eastern sky, grey softening slowly into something warmer. Behind them, the bat computer completes its final cycle of the night, screens dimming one by one into standby, the soft hum of machinery settling into near silence. The Batmobile sits fully charged now in its cradle, patient, waiting for whatever tomorrow night requires of it. "Another night's coming," Dick says quietly, watching the light change over the grounds. "It always does," Bruce answers. "Gotham never runs out of nights that need watching over." "Does that ever get exhausting?" Dick asks, though there's no real doubt in the question, more curiosity than concern. Bruce considers this honestly before answering. "Sometimes, but less than you'd think. There's something steadying about it, actually, knowing the work continues, knowing there will always be another mystery, another person who needs help, another chance to keep the promise. It gives shape to time that would otherwise just pass." Dick smiles faintly at that. The same smile Bruce remembers from a 9-year-old boy discovering, slowly, that grief could eventually make room for purpose again. They stand together in silence for a while longer, watching the dawn arrive properly now, gold beginning to touch the wet leaves scattered across the manor grounds, birds beginning their first tentative morning calls somewhere in the trees beyond the fence line. "I should let you sleep," Dick says eventually. "You look like you haven't in days." "I haven't," Bruce admits, something almost like a laugh in his voice. "Tonight might actually be the first time in a while." Dick claps a hand briefly on his shoulder, an easy, familiar gesture, the kind only family shares without a second thought, and heads back toward the manor, footsteps light on the stone stairs leading up from the cave. Bruce remains at the entrance a while longer, alone now, watching Gotham's skyline slowly emerge from night's shadow into morning's soft grey-gold light. Somewhere out there, the city is waking too. Bakeries opening their shutters, buses beginning their routes. Ordinary people beginning ordinary days, entirely unaware of everything that moved quietly through the dark to keep those ordinary mornings possible. He thinks of his parents briefly, the way he always does at dawn. He thinks of Alfred, still sleeping upstairs, who will wake soon and find the tea he left cooling in the cave gone cold, and who will simply smile knowingly rather than ask questions, because Alfred always somehow already knows. He thinks of Dick and Jason somewhere out there in his own complicated orbit, and Tim and Damien and Barbara watching over all of them still, even now, even from a wheelchair, with nothing but intelligence and refusal to quit. He thinks of Clark, probably already awake himself, greeting his own sunrise somewhere over Metropolis with the easy optimism Bruce has never quite managed to borrow for himself, but has always been grateful exists somewhere in the world regardless. He thinks of Gotham itself, wounded, complicated, beautiful in ways that only reveal themselves to people patient enough to look past the shadows for it. "Another night," he says softly to the empty cave behind him, to the city waking slowly ahead of him, to no one and everyone at once. Another mystery, another chance. He turns, finally, walking back toward the stairs that lead up into the manor, into daylight, into whatever brief rest the coming hours will allow him before duty calls again, as it always eventually does. Behind him, the cave settles into its daytime quiet, waterfalls still falling patiently in the dark, trophy cases holding their careful histories, family mementos resting undisturbed now that their small mystery has finally resolved itself into something as simple and warm as a homecoming. The Bat computer sits dark and silent, waiting. The Batmobile rests fully charged, patient. And somewhere above, Gotham continues waking into another ordinary, extraordinary day. Safe for now, watched over, the way it has been for decades, the way it will continue to be for as long as someone remains willing to keep an old promise made on a rain-soaked street outside a movie theater a lifetime ago. The cave grows quiet. Dawn settles fully over Gotham. And somewhere, finally, Bruce Wayne closes his eyes